In 2018, one Melbourne suburb saw median house prices jump 22% in the 3 years before the metro tunnel was announced. 3 years before a single tunnel boring machine went into the ground. That same play is setting up right now on a project that's twice as big, spans twice as many suburbs, and has so far flown almost completely under the radar of retail investors. Most people are chasing the metro tunnel uplift that's already priced in. They're late. In the next 14 minutes, I'll show you the project that's replacing it. The real numbers from the Suburban Rail Loop, the suburbs where the ripple is starting to move, and exactly where the under $750,000 entry point still exists. Before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, I'm Sean and I run PropSpotter. We're a property investment system built on 3 pillars: research, source, and coach. What that means in practice is this: we use over 30 institutional grade data sources to identify the right suburbs for your next investment property. Then, our proprietary listing system monitors those suburbs 24/7 and alerts you the moment a new property goes live, before most investors have even opened domain and realestate.com.au that morning. And then we coach you through every step from evaluation to settlement via a dedicated WhatsApp group. It's everything a buyer's agent provides: the research, the sourcing, the guidance, except you keep the skills, you stay in control of every decision, and it costs a fraction of the price. We've coached over 50 investors across Australia with a perfect 5-star rating on Google. If you want to learn more, the link to book a free strategy call is in the description. Now, let's get into the data. Today's video is a sequel to one of the most watched videos we've ever put out, the Melbourne Metro Tunnel breakdown from earlier this year. If you haven't seen that one, we'll link it in the description. That video got traction because it did something most property channels don't. It told you what the infrastructure uplift had already priced in to the surrounding suburbs, not what it might do, what it had done. The comment that kept coming back was, "Okay, Sean, thanks for that. What's next?" So that's this video, the next major Melbourne transport project, the one that's already under construction, the one that will reshape middle ring property demand in a way the metro tunnel can't, because it doesn't just add capacity on one line. It creates an orbital, a second CBD pattern, and the 6 suburbs it connects are about to become the most connected parts of Melbourne outside of the city itself. And I'll tell you the controversial bit up front. The play here isn't what most property YouTubers will tell you. It's not to buy in Box Hill or Glen Waverley. Those are already priced. The real play is 2 stops out. I'll show you where. This is the Suburban Rail Loop East, SRL East. And before you roll your eyes because you've never heard of it or you've heard of it, give me 90 seconds, because the numbers are different from what's in the news cycle. 26 kilometers of twin underground tunnels, 6 brand new stations, combined state and federal funding commitment of $14 billion on the current public numbers, 11.8 billion from the Victorian government and 2.2 billion from the Commonwealth. That's bigger than the metro tunnel, and it's only stage 1 of a 4-stage 90-kilometer orbital system. Here's what changed in 2026, the year we're in right now. Tunnel boring machines are already on site. Excavation at Clarinda is already 20 meters below the surface. 4 TBNs will begin boring from the Clarinda launch site towards Cheltenham and Glen Waverley. Another 4 will launch from Burwood. Over 3,000 construction workers are on the project today. This isn't a proposal. This isn't a promise. This is concrete being poured. Trains are planned to start running in 2035. That gives property investors a 9-year window before the project goes live, and the research on every comparable Australian rail project tells us the price curve starts moving well before the opening day. Now, the bit that every other person missed: SRL East isn't just a rail project. The legislated objective is to build 70,000 new homes around the 6 station precincts by 2050. That's not a ballpark. That's the state government's stated target currently in precinct planning with local councils. 70,000 dwellings concentrated around 6 nodes. That's a massive rezoning story. And rezoning stories are where the biggest capital growth events in Australian property history have occurred. Think Green Square in Sydney, think Melbourne, Docklands, and think Fortitude Valley in Brisbane. So here's where 95% of property content gets it wrong. If I told the average buyer's agent or influencer the SRL East was happening, they'd tell you the play is buy in Box Hill, buy in Glen Waverley, buy in Clayton, get in before the opening. Let me show you why that's financially broken. Here's the hashtag data current to March 2026. Mitcham, $1.19 million typical house price with a gross yield of 2.64%. Ringwood East, $1 million flat, 3.17% yield. Springvale, 1.05 mil, 2.66% yield, and Noble Park, 853,000, 3.1% yield. Every single one of those is already well above the PropSpotter Melbourne house ceiling of $750,000, and every single one of those yields is below what we consider a serviceable cash flow threshold. The reality is, the SRL East uplift is already planned into the station suburbs. The smart money got in during 2020 to 2023 when the project was announced and major contracts were signed. If you buy the station today, you're buying the news, not the growth. So where's the play, you may ask? It's what I call the ripple zone. When a new rail line opens, the growth story doesn't stop at the station. It moves outward. The areas 1 or 2 existing train stops away on the lines that feed into the new hub, those are where price compression drives buyers when the direct zone properties become unaffordable. We saw this with the Metro Tunnel. Everyone talked about Parkville and Arden. The actual 3-year capital growth leaders were Suburbs a couple of stops out on the Sunbury and Pakenham lines, which suddenly had much faster connections into the CBD. The SRL East plays the same game, and a budget of $750,000 or less, I can show you exactly one house market winner and 2 unit plays that make the numbers work. Dandenong, postcode 3175. Part of the city of Greater Dandenong. Typical house price right now per hashtag data, 773,813. Median rent, $530 a week with a gross yield of just over 3.5%. The typical price does sit above the $750,000 ceilings, but this is a large, diverse market. 15,656 dwellings. On any given day, there are entry-level 3-bedroom homes trading inside our range. What matters is what's driving the underlying demand curve. Here's the case. Dandenong sits on the Cranbourne and Pakenham lines. From Dandenong Station, it's 5 stops to Clayton, one of the new SRL East stations. When SRL East opens in 2035, a resident in Dandenong gets a direct interchange at Clayton, then a fast underground orbital to Monash University, Deakin, Box Hill, and ultimately in later stages to the airport. Compare that to today, where a trip from Dandenong to Box Hill is a 90-minute multi-line mission. SRL East compresses it to roughly 20 minutes. That's not a marginal upgrade. That's a transport revolution for a household sitting at the $773,000 entry point. The supporting metrics. Dandenong has annual sales volume of 190 houses. It's a liquid market, annual rentals of 221 houses, an estimated adult population of over 30,000 people. It sits directly adjacent to the Greater Dandenong Activity Centre, which has its own state government endorsed densification plan independent of SRL East. Yield is probably the limitation, where it's modest at 3.57%. It's a capital growth play, not a cash flow play. You buy Dandenong for where it sits on the 2035 Melbourne map, not for what it pays in rent today. Rough modelling on a $730,000 entry has you with a 20% deposit of $146 and an 80% loan of $584,000. At current investor rates around 6.1% weekly, rent of $510, you're looking at a pre-tax cash flow shortfall of roughly $180 to $220 a week prior to depreciation. Factor in depreciation, and for most PAYG investors on the top marginal bracket, that shortfall compresses to $90 to $150 a week after tax. That's serviceable for a buy and hold investor with a long horizon, which, given the SRL East doesn't open until 2035, is exactly what this play is. Now, house plays in the SRL East station suburbs are gone, but the unit markets are an entirely different conversation. And this is where I think most investors miss a very clean opportunity. Units in Glen, Waverley, Clayton, and Box Hill are under $600,000 are sitting right inside PropSpotter's unit ceiling. They're directly at the station, and they're a category that's historically undershot its house counterpart in the last Melbourne cycle. Why the undershoot? Between 2015 and 2020, Melbourne had a large apartment oversupply story, and unit median price growth stalled. That oversupply has now largely worked its way through the middle ring suburbs, and the SRL East thesis sits on top of a market that's been flat for long enough to reset. The thesis: when the SRL East opens in 2035, the residents most willing to live in a small apartment are the exact demographic the orbital is targeting. Young professionals commuting between Monash, Deakin, and the health and employment nodes along the line. That's a renter base that's grown every census since 2011 and is forecast by Infrastructure Victoria to keep growing. The risk is real too. Apartment capital growth in Melbourne has historically tracked below houses structurally. You're not trying to hit annual growth of 10% a year. You're trying to hit a rent-adjusted 5 to 6% total return, with the 2035 SRL opening as a meaningful tailwind. If you model a $550,000 entry-level 2-bed unit at Box Hill with $480 a week rent, you're in the 4.5% yield range, which is vastly better than the equivalent house yield in the same suburb. If I'm speaking to a cash flow-oriented Melbourne buyer right now, SRL adjacent units inside $600,000 are one of the categories where I think the macro level narrative and the property level numbers actually intersect. Now, an honesty that you might not get anywhere else. This is a 2035 thesis, not a 2027 thesis. And there are 3 risks you need to be honest about before you commit capital. Risk number 1, political. The state Liberal National Opposition has consistently opposed the SRL project, and the opposition committed during the 2022 campaign to honour the $2.2 billion of early works, but to reappropriate the remaining $9.6 billion. If there's a change of government mid-bill, the project's funding profile could shift. What's already committed and under contract is largely safe. The Southern Tunnelling contract was signed in December 2023 for $3.6 billion, but the later stages are not locked in. Risk 2, timeline slip. The opening is scheduled for 2035. Every major Australian rail project in the last 30 years has slipped. The Metro Tunnel slipped. WestConnex slipped. Every Sydney Metro line we've seen has slipped. Budget the possibility of a 2036 or 2037 opening into your capital growth model. Risk 3, broader Melbourne cycle. Even a great suburb level thesis can be overridden by a macro downturn in the Melbourne market. Interest rate moves, land tax changes, state level policy on investment property, all of these can stall suburb level uplift regardless of infrastructure. Right now, Melbourne is structurally underpriced relative to Sydney and Brisbane on most dwelling value to income ratios, which I believe supports the thesis, but you should stress test your model. This is not a speculative flip pay, this is a 10-year buy and hold where the infrastructure is the macro tailwind, not the entire investment. Let me summarize. The Metro Tunnel story is largely priced in. If you bought into this catchment between 2018 and 2022, well done. Those gains are yours. If you're buying there today, you're paying for the uplift someone else already captured. The SRL East story is 9 years ahead of its opening. 80% of its early works contracts are signed and 3,000 workers are on site today. The suburbs at the 6 stations are already priced above the PropSpotter Melbourne house ceiling. The plays that are still under $750,000, houses in Dandenong at $773, which is slightly above the price ceiling, but with deep enough volume that entry-level homes trade inside the budget. Units in Glen, Waverley, Box Hill and Clayton under $600,000, direct station exposure, unit yield advantage, and post-oversupply reset. These are long-haul thesis plays, not 12-month flips. If your strategy is a buy and hold with a 10-year plus horizon and your household can service the cash flow shortfall of an investment in the Melbourne growth skewed band, this is where I'd be looking. If your strategy is cash flow first, short hold, sub 5 year, this isn't your video. Have a look at some of our stuff on Tasmania instead. If this was useful to you, the 2 things that help the channel most, hit the subscribe button and drop a comment telling me which Melbourne suburb you think is most likely to outperform as SRL East opens. I read every comment and genuinely use them for our next videos. And if you want this kind of analysis personalized to your own strategy, your own budget, your risk profile, your target markets, well, that's exactly what PropSpotter is built for. The link to book a free strategy call is in the description, and I'll see you guys on the next one.